You're listening to the Sokan Community Podcast. Your favorite source for gaming, film, and internet debate starts now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sokan Podcast. I'm your host, T, and with me are Jace and Leo.
That's me, Jace Drayson!
Hello, Leo.
So we're gonna base ourselves off of a meme again today, which is specifically the one of the dog that's sitting in his kitchen while everything around him is on fire, and he's just casually drinking something out of a mug and going, "This is fine." That's gonna be us today, because forget everything else that's going on in the world. We're just gonna talk about nerd stuff. So, how have you guys been this last week?
Super good and getting better. I heard you almost say a different word than stuff, just FYI. It was in my ear and I heard it and I know what you almost did.
She said stuff.
That "this is fine" meme, I feel that meme on a spiritual level in my day-to-day life.
Yeah, because I find we talk about escapism, and particularly with the hobby that is video gaming, it could not be more apropos. But pretty good this week.
Could be better, could be worse. It's just kind of vanilla. I'd like a topping or two, maybe a different flavor, but if you've got vanilla, you shouldn't complain. Just eat your frickin' ice cream.
Alright, well, now that I'm craving ice cream, today we'll be discussing the Pokemon DLC, the ongoing Spider-Man deal between Sony and Disney, and Star Wars celebrities reacting to anger from their fans. On November 15th of 2019, Pokemon Sword and Shield were released and quickly received backlash because they were one of the first Pokemon games to not include every single Pokemon that's existed so far. There was no national dex. Nintendo and the Pokemon Company have decided to release 2 DLC expansions to the game that will add new areas to the Galar region, as well as over 200 of the Pokemon that weren't included from previous games. Worth noting, you don't have to buy the DLC to catch the Pokemon. But why do you think they didn't just include those Pokemon to begin with?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe because there's a million effing Pokemons.
Yeah, there's a lot. I heard there were like 400 released. That's a lot to me. I guess not to Pokemon fans.
I mean, I guess Pokemon fans want all their Pokemons in one serving. Listen, you gotta sit out a little bit. You don't need everything right up front. Just get some of the Pokemons now, and I know you gotta catch them all, but just wait for a minute, and when you have the opportunity, then you can catch the rest. Catch the first batch while they're fresh, then get the next batch while they're still hot.
Like you're baking cookies. Yes.
Right.
Well, I do think, I mean, if I heard that it wasn't intentional, but I've also heard that it was intentional, that they were intending to kind of piecemeal out the release. And I mean, if that was the deal, then that's the deal.
Listen, if you give someone a little bit of something, chances are they're going to want more of it. I don't know. I have not talked to any Pokemon developers, but the fact of the matter is people want all the Pokemons. If you don't give them all, guess what they're going to want? More. So they have an automatic craving for the rest of the game. I think it was relatively smart to do if they did it on purpose. Give the people, whet their appetite with maybe a little bit of an appetizer, and give them the full course once you've got it ready to go. I just don't get it. Honestly, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't get what the drama is, because you're not going to catch them all in the first 5 minutes anyway, right? Like, it's going to take you a minute. Do I not know how these games work? I'm not sure. But get what you can now, and chances are more will come later. Why are you trying to cry because you can't catch everything already?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's obvious. Jason and I are not real big Pokemon fans. I've never played any of the games. I actually had to look up a bunch of stuff to even figure out why this was a deal, and I just don't get why it was a big deal. But again, I'm not big into Pokemon. I don't know. I did hear though that when they were first asked about it, they said that they weren't intending to release any more Pokemon. That what came with the game was what players were going to get, but they received a lot of backlash for it. And I think there was they potentially changed their minds because of all of that backlash. And they decided to go ahead and give the people what they want.
I suppose if you're a huge Baconator fan and Baconator wasn't out in the original release, then you're like stressed about it. And I mean, if I could switch genres a little bit, and I think that when JJ relaunched Star Trek, and if he hadn't had perhaps a Scotty on the crew, I might have been, a little upset about it. I would have wanted my full crew. Granted, there's not 400 crew on the Enterprise. Well, there is, but not in the bridge crew. Anyway. I have played Pokemons before. My daughter was into the Pokemons Go. Remember that one? When everybody went outside for like a month and a half?
When gamers were outside, yeah.
Yeah, it was actually kind of cool. Honestly, I wasn't into it. She was, and I would drive her to the park and to the, because there were only certain places you could get the certain Pokemons.
Right.
And it was really kind of bizarre. Yeah, I've been alive a long time, and I've never experienced a phenomenon before or since that was like Pokemon Go, where you're like, hey, you looking for the Pokemons? Yeah, me and my kid too. How you doing? And you just make friends with everybody in the wild.
In the wild. A wild gamer appears. The Pokemon has a strangely, passionately loyal fan base. Like, in the videos that I was watching, just trying to figure out what the big deal was about this, like, I saw grown up, like, actually upset, very upset, and really passionately arguing one side or the other for, this being a DLC and not seeing all the Pokemon and whatnot. And I was like, man, who does that? And then I remembered my own rants about like all of the other fan stuff that I get passionate about. So it is what it is.
It is what it is. How long have the Pokemon been around? Do you know? Is that like back in the 90s, the first time they came about?
Man, I have no idea. T, do you know?
I think so. I think it was like mid 90s the first time they came around.
Oh, I'm getting some inspiration in my ear. 1996, I think.
There you go. Mid 90s. Jace knows what's up. I know what the Pokemons is. I mean, I thought about seeing that one movie because Ryan Reynolds was up, but it didn't show his face, so I didn't pay the price.
That movie didn't get very good reviews. I
didn't watch it. I don't know. I probably will never watch it.
It was entertaining. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, maybe I will.
I'm trying to catch up on Grace and Frankie. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to Pokemons. I do like Ryan Reynolds, though.
Alright, so I'm gonna take it you guys don't think that this qualifies then as an unfinished game.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's finished. I don't know if they intended to just put out part of the game and then to, like I said, whet people's appetites for the rest of it. I'm not sure. I think it's a smart thing to do. I think that when you have a property that has so many characters, doling them out a little bit at a time is relatively brilliant. It's not the first time something like that has been done. If you look at like the mobile game, the Star Wars Galaxy's mobile game, I think that's what it's, Galaxy of Heroes. They didn't put out every Star Wars character ever when the game came out. They have these little updates and releases where you can get the latest and the different and the variant. It's called business. Even back in the day, whenever Star Wars toys were coming out, they put out Han Solo, but then they put out Han Solo in the Hoth outfit. Like there's when you're collecting, the more options you have to collect, the more money the company's going to make. So I don't know what their intention was, but I feel like if they were holding back and they wanted to put out more of the little pocket monsters in later releases, it's not a dumb thing to do.
Yeah, I don't know if what they did. Well, I do think it was a smart thing to do financially. I think what has a lot of Pokemon fans up in arms is, I think in their opinions, this is an unfinished game because of the lack of so many of their beloved Pokemons. What are they called? Pokemon? What are the?
I think it's Pokemon, plural.
Pokemon?
Pokemon is both singular and plural.
Oh, Pokemon is singular and plural. Okay, all right. T with the lesson. Okay, but I like where I would consider a game unfinished would be like important mechanics missing or content missing or, things that are kind of fundamental to most games we play. And the truth is, this is a huge game. It's a gigantic series. It's a huge property, and this is, basically a AAA title. And the fact that there's so much missing that a lot of the fans expect to be there, I think would constitute an unfinished game.
Simply by the fact that there's not characters there? I mean,
Yeah.
If you can play the game and the game is functional, I don't know that characters missing is necessarily missing content, is it?
I think just because it's Pokemon, I do think a lot of folks look at that as the content of the game. It is about catching them all. And when you can't catch them all because they're not in the game, I would say from their perspective, it's unfinished.
Well, catch what you can, my goodness.
My goodness.
We normally don't associate Nintendo with the same actions. Like, for example, if this had been an EA game, I think we would have been like, oh yeah, it's for money. Then it just kind of would have been accepted as something generally scummy and moved on. Or at least a business move, and then moved on. But we usually don't think of Nintendo in the same light. We've mentioned before that it's one of the most family-friendly companies. But they do, when it comes to Pokemon, they will release 2 versions of what are very similar or identical games with very slight differences. They come out in pairs, or in one case, I think, in a trio, and that's like Pokemon Sun and Moon, or in this case, Sword and Shield. Do you think that taking the DLC route to expand on those will be well received, or do you think that it's going to cheapen the game's worth?
I think ultimately the way that they've been released in the past has been exactly what you described with they'd come out with a game and then a year later or so they would remaster it, tweak it, add a little bit to it, and then release it again, and the fans would buy a second game that was like 80% of stuff they'd already done before with a touch more, and they're paying like full ticket price for a whole new game. I think doing it this way with DLCs is actually less expensive for fans to get to see that new content without having to redo the whole game again. So I think this is, I don't know, I wouldn't say scummy. This is actually probably more fiscally responsible for fans who are going to buy it.
I mean, cry more is kind of where I'm at. Listen, used to, video games would just come out and they would be finished and you would play them. Then guess what? They stopped being finished and they would have to put out patches to make them finished. Then guess what? They found out ways to make more money by calling stuff DLC or added content or season pass. This is just part and parcel for the world that we live in. And I don't know why fans of Pokemon would think that their world is going to be any different than the rest of ours.
Get on the train. For everyone.
Yeah, get on the train. We're all going to have to pay more money for all of the things that we want. That is life. Don't cry about it, because that's not going to help. If you really want to protest, get all your Pokemon friends together and don't buy it. But I don't think that's going to happen. Chances are we're just going to have to swallow the pill and buy the DLC.
I feel like you're jaded, Jace.
It's not jaded. It's an acceptance of reality. And part of it is because, I make an income and I have a particular portion of that income that I can just siphon off to my hobbies. And not everyone can do that. And I respect that. And I'm very grateful for my particular piece of privilege. But my God, everybody's having to do this. It's not a new thing. Well, I guess in the grand scheme, since the beginning of time, it's a new thing. But as far as gaming goes, it's not all that new of a thing. You gotta catch them all. You gotta be willing to pay the price. Until we all band together and say no to the market, then the market is going to keep demanding our dollar bills. Right now, we're just shuffling them off like what is it, a make it rain situation for the game developers. That's where we are, and it's not necessarily jaded as much as acceptance.
Yeah, I mean, to a point, I agree. In a lot of ways, I look at it as I want to support developers that are doing good work, and in a lot of ways, I can see, as has been discussed, like Nintendo hasn't been perceived as that kind of scummy decision maker like EA. Where it's make a profit at all costs, and I can see some people's heartburn over watching what's largely considered one of the good guys in the industry turn to the dark side. See that little Star Wars reference in there.
I'm very proud.
Thank you. And I've noticed. I think what a lot of people are feeling is concern over that. Like, this is one of the good guys that have resorted to bad guy tactics, and I'm not so sure that a DLC is a bad guy tactic. There's a lot of work that goes into that, and in many ways I want to support, if it's good work, I want to support that work, those developers and those folks who are pouring blood, sweat, and tears into it. It's when it's like cash shop, gouging and loot boxes and that other kind of garbage that gets thrown around. I don't like that. But when it's content, yeah, I'm for it.
How many Pokemons can you name without looking it up?
One.
Which one?
Pikachu. Oh no, I can name Charizard. That's 2.
There you go, 2.
Squirtle. That's 3.
That's 3.
That's it.
Is Ratatouille one? I think I can name Ratatouille.
Rattata.
Rattata.
Like, oh, what about Bulbasaur?
That is fun.
Is that one?
Okay, we could do this all night. Also, Jace, I love that you're like, don't cry about it when that's essentially what we do here.
That's kind of the point of the show.
So, anyway, despite the controversy of the game and any decisions that have been made along with it, it has apparently broken records for being the fastest selling Pokemon game of all time. So I guess people can't be all that mad?
No, we're gamers and nerds. They can be super mad.
So, everyone who follows the MCU, you know that there was a portion of 2019 in which the fate of Spider-Man became a huge unknown, because Disney and Sony were fighting over the rights to make Spider-Man's movies in the MCU. Though the companies have come to a sort of stalemate new agreement, Sony did officially put a price tag on Spider-Man's movie rights at $10 billion, which is more than Disney paid for the entire Marvel franchise and Lucasfilms put together. Do you think that price is actually worth it?
No. I think that price tag was a big middle finger to Disney.
Yeah, I think that was the whole point of that. It kind of like felt like that scene in Austin Powers where Dr. Evil goes, $10 billion, and then the whole like White House laughs at him.
Yeah, I can't see that being. There's no way that it's worth the Spider-Man property is worth anything near that. And I think Sony they just don't want Disney to have it.
I love Spider-Man, and not only do I love Spider-Man, I love this particular iteration of Spider-Man with Tom Holland, the pumpkin of all pumpkins, more than I love most anything on this planet, maybe even my own child. And I have to say, even with that, I think $10 billion is absurd. It's absurdity. The entire, as you said, the entire Star Wars franchise was bought for about $4 billion. It's really kind of rather serious, rather silly for Sony to expect that. And I know it's not just one character. It is Spider-Man plus all his peripherals. Granted. But $10 billion, like, how many movies? You'd have to make 10 movies before you even broke even on the character. And the fact of the matter is, eventually, someday, Spider-Man's bouncing back to Disney because Sony doesn't have eternal rights to the character.
Right.
And I say 10 movies a little loose. That's $10 billion movies, man. The last Spider-Man movie did make a bill. But I don't know that you can count on that for 10 movies straight.
Some people think that Disney might actually bite and might try to buy out Sony, but there's also been some rumors that Apple is making plans to take the bait. If that happens, Spider-Man's movies rights will just fall to Disney for pretty much free. Do you think it would be smart for Disney to wait it out, or do you think it would be better to play it safe and go ahead and buy the rights themselves?
I mean, I guess what's the risk of waiting? That Sony might sell it in the meantime to somebody else for $10 billion? I mean, no, I don't think there's any. They have to wait. I mean, it's the only smart play.
And I really don't think that Sony can sublease the rights. Ultimately, Marvel owns the character of Spider-Man. They have licensed that character to Sony Pictures so that Sony can make movies about Spider-Man and his peripheral characters. Should they fail to make the movies within the time period, should the contract be breached, should they reach the end of the contract naturally, that character will then revert back, the license will end, and that character will revert back to the parent owner, which is Marvel, which Disney already owns. It wouldn't even make sense for them to do anything but wait, unless they're willing to part with $10 billion, which, you know, that's one of those things like, okay, yeah, right, you want to buy it, fine, $10 billion, how about that? Where, you know, Disney would have to be kind of like stupid to do it, but then even if they did, Sony would be making enough money that it doesn't matter that they lost that particular property.
Yeah, I just don't see. I can't imagine there being a condition with all that we know, wherein Disney would want to spend that money. I mean, it's just it's kind of ludicrous. I think when it was proposed, it was known to be ludicrous, and there's, you know, maybe they're hoping, hey, maybe somebody over there is crazy enough to write us a check. But,
yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
they're
the-
just desperate enough to keep that plan for Marvel Phase 4.
Right. The bonus right now is that they did work out a deal. The bonus is right now Disney and Sony kind of get to share Spider-Man a little bit. Spider-Man, Tom Holland Spider-Man gets to live in the MCU, or at least half of him does. I think they're actually going to be building kind of a separate universe with him, but on Sony's side with like Venom and some of the other characters over there. It's not MCU, but he's going to kind of exist in two universes. So they can kind of have their cake and eat it too right now. They can make money off of him. He can be a part of their big, huge MCU franchise, and they can wait at the same time. So there's really no huge bonus, in my opinion, for Disney to do anything but just ride the wave, keep milking the MCU and Spider-Man as long as you can in it.
What's the big deal with Spider-Man? I mean, you're a huge fan, and I know, Jace, you had said that it had, like, when it was up in the air, like, you were upset about it. What's the deal?
I really was, like, genuinely, whenever the announcement was made that they weren't going to make a deal and that Spider-Man, the character, the Tom Holland Spider-Man, was parting ways with the MCU, it really, truly was heartbreaking to me. And part of that was because the huge victory of getting Spider-Man into the MCU in Civil War was a huge win, a huge joy for Marvel fans like me. When you think of Marvel comics, Spider-Man's kind of the guy. For a long time, even his face was the emblem for Marvel Comics. He's the seminal Marvel character. Something about that character, him being kind of a nerdy teen, being an outcast, being someone who was not particularly popular, he was marginalized as a human, but then having this particular thing happen to him that made him spectacular, and then he took that and made the world better. He's just a really inspiring character for nerdy dudes like me. So I've always been particularly drawn to him, even prior to any films being made. I mean, I remember I think it was a 1970s Spider-Man movie that was just terrible, but I watched it over and over and over again because that character is just really cool. Not to mention the power set is really cool. I mean, he can shoot webs, he can climb walls, he's got the strength of a spider, he's got the spider sense, or the Peter tingle, as Tom Holland calls it. It's all good stuff. It's just a really well-written and developed character with a really cool power set that speaks to a lot of people that might have felt ostracized in their teen years.
But you've even resorted to console peasantry to play the game.
Absolutely. In fact, I bought a PS4 for the purpose of playing the Spider-Man game.
So let's talk about some of those periphery characters, because if Disney or Apple or anybody did buy the Spider-Man rights back, they wouldn't just get the web slinger that we know, but all of his secondary characters and villains too. That totals up to 900 characters, all told, that originally belonged to Marvel. With Venom's standalone film being a relative success, the animated Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did really well, and then an upcoming Morbius film, other than Spider-Man, Peter Parker Spider-Man even, we'll narrow it down. What characters would you like to see in the mainstream Marvel movies?
So there's a ton of characters. And I started looking into, what's out there, what might be, on the periphery of, public awareness that would make a good movie. And I noticed there are a ton that already have had their own standalone movies. Elektra has had her movie. Deadpool has had a couple.
Although the TV show was pretty good.
Oh, you didn't like the Deadpool movies?
I'm not a huge fan of tongue-in-cheek. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm super excited for him to join the MCU. I think it's going to be great. But something about breaking the fourth wall for me irks.
I mean, that's... I don't know.
That's the thing, I know. In the comics even, he broke the fourth wall. That's his shtick. And Ryan Reynolds, again, this is the second segment where we talk about that man. I could watch him peel potatoes and feel super happy. Although he's not very pretty in the Deadpool movies. But anyway, he's still charming.
I think he looks... What did they say he looked like? A potato? Oh, I can't remember.
Looked like an avocado had sex with a cheese grater.
That's right.
I mean, they're funny. They're funny movies.
I think of, I have loved Deadpool movies. And him breaking the fourth wall is... It's equated because, or it's because he's a crazy person, and it's like a crazy person who's talking to somebody who isn't there. And to me, I find that bit of fourth wall breaking, I find that hilarious. And I don't know, I can't get enough. I'm hoping that it sticks to the crass and really in your face, I guess non-Disney way of movie or storytelling, because it's so good. I want more of that. I want more Deadpool.
I want a little cliche, just because we already have Into the Spider-Verse, but I would love a Miles Morales Spider-Man Uber film. There's his story is really cool. I wouldn't mind having a Spider-Gwen. I have to say, I'm not a big fan of movies that are about villains. The whole time they were going to do the Sinister Six, I wasn't super excited about that. Venom, I'm not super excited about that. Most of the time, the reason is because when you have a movie centered on villains, you try to make them more... You humanize them, and you try to get a little bit into their heads, and you give them their motivations some sense. And I really like my villains just to be bad guys. I don't need to feel particularly sorry for a villain. I don't need to understand why they do what they do. I just want to see
the opposite with villains.
No, I just want to see my good guy beat his butt and move on from it. I don't want
It's
to
always
feel
you and
sad.
butts.
Yeah, imagine that.
I love when there's some depth to villains. When I've tried to RP as a villain, I want there to be an excuse for it. I want there to be a reason. Magneto is probably my favorite, just because of his... you can almost appreciate where he's coming from. I like that. I hate when they're just, oh, it's the bad guy, get him.
I don't necessarily want them to be one-dimensional bad. They can have a reason, and they can have a motivation that's their own, but I don't want to sympathize with that motivation. I don't want to say, is the bad guy really bad? No, I don't need that kind of trouble in my life. The bad guy just needs to be bad. His reasons can be bad. His motivation can be bad. He might have had a bad, sorry life too, but make better choices, sir. You don't have to have... you don't have to create a machine that flies through the air so that you can steal tech just because you got fired from a job. I've been fired from a job and I didn't get wings and go steal from people.
But what if you get those kinds of arc like Darth Vader's arc, we got to appreciate where he came from, and then
That
we got
little
to see
prick
him
was a
redeem
prick
himself.
from day one.
He was
I
just
never
a
really
know-it-all.
sympathized with Anakin. They failed at that for me. When he was a kid, I guess he was just annoying, but he was never like virtuous. He was never a great kid. He was always kind of into himself. And as a teen, and then again in Revenge, how did we put Star Wars again in the next? Anyways, I never really sympathized with Vader.
It's always Star Wars. It's always Star Wars.
For now, there's no news on Spider-Man's ultimate future, but we're sure there'll be more insults and deals slung across the table in due time. Want to tell us your own feelings on the matter? Tweet at us at Sokan Gaming on Twitter, especially if you've got more pictures of the Spider-Man. Return of the Star Wars quota. We really can't go a single episode without talking about it, but I promise this isn't planned. Those of you who have not seen Rise of Skywalker, don't worry, we're not going to be talking about that today. But if you have, and you're waiting patiently to hear us debate about everything and literally everything that happened in that movie, tune into our Season 4 finale in a couple of weeks. That'll be the day. Until then, let's talk about the backlash of the movie, and how the stars and creators have handled it. Because ever since the release of Rise of Skywalker, John Boyega and company have been the subject of many memes and articles about how they've reacted to the fan base disliking, or in some cases liking, parts of the movie. What are your thoughts, without any further guidance of mine, on Boyega fighting back against the fandom's reactions to the film?
I have found him to be funny. I know that he's getting a lot of criticism for the tone he's taken with a lot of the tweets and his reactions to other people's reactions, but man, I find the guy funny.
I'm not sure what it is people expect from actors. Like, because he acted in a film, he has to act a certain way or behave a certain way or say certain things, and I don't feel like he's being disrespectful towards the content. I don't necessarily feel like he's being disrespectful towards his character. He's just making light of the fact that people are being ultra critical.
Yeah.
Who cares? Like, why can't he do that?
I've seen him too a couple of times where he's like, guys, it's just a movie. Like, relax. It's just a movie. And I mean, people have just gone off the rails, I think, in their reactions to him.
To me, it's more than just a movie, and I will say, as a huge fan, that granted, Star Wars is a big deal to me, and it has been for the vast majority of my life. But at the same time, I also realize that there's a real world outside of that particular piece of entertainment media, and this guy, a young dude who got cast in a role, does not bear the torch. I mean, it's not on him to have to carry my fandom on his shoulders. I don't know why people expect him to.
I think maybe that's it, is just because he doesn't have that kind of reverence for the material that a lot of the fans do, and the fact that he's making light of things and he's picking at it. I think it rubs people the wrong way. Like, this is a lot of people's holy grail. Like, this is it for, genres that they love, and a lot of people have wrapped their own lives around Star Wars. So yeah, I can see how him being so flippant about it could rub some super fans the wrong way.
But he's not necessarily being flippant about the source material. I would say that he's being flippant about the fact that it's not real. Maybe he's being flippant about the fandom, perhaps. But the source material, I've never really seen or heard anything where he's like crapping on the Star Wars universe. He's just saying, don't take it so seriously.
One of the ones that I thought was actually really funny was where he said he was poking fun at the Reylo fans, and he said, it was like a Star Wars relationship, and it had the two of them killing each other, like a bunch of shots. Like, this is a Star Wars romance. Like, yeah, I mean, that's about what it was.
But he's not totally wrong. Like, even if you go back to the original trilogy, it's not like Han and Leia were immediately, roses and candy at the door. They fought and complained and griped at each other. That's the whole thing where the scruff with the Nerf herder came from, was them having that hot tension. Granted, they weren't casting lightsabers at one another.
Trying to kill each other.
They weren't literally trying to kill each other, but it's not like Star Wars is where you go for romance. Come on.
No, and I thought the romance between Anakin and oh no, why is her name escaping me? His
Padme.
Padme, yeah, wow. Like that romance was supposed to be that kind of perfect romance, and it was pretty cringeworthy in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, it was borderline nightmare. I mean, I'm a huge fan, and it was borderline nightmare. I hate sand.
Worth noting, Harrison Ford has never been fond of Star Wars either.
Well,
yeah,
and this is true.
That's true. I remember him say he was relieved that Han Solo finally kicked the bucket. He was like, man, I don't have to play him anymore. That'd be great.
He wanted him to get killed in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of instances of Kelly Marie Tran being called weak for being pushed off of social media. Sexual jokes made about Rey as a character, despite Daisy Ridley leaving social media as well, specifically because of the sexualization of her character. Although it was the fandom that pushed them away, Boyega's received a lot of flack from that same fandom about those remarks that he's made in the same vein. Is there a right side of that argument?
Yeah, stop being a... I mean, really, the internet is an ugly place. Let's be honest. People have this anonymity where they can say and be and act really, really rudely. And one of the values that I like to impart upon perhaps the Sokan community, or even my guild, is there is a real person on the other side of that computer. And we love to laugh, we like to make jokes, but you don't need to be so disrespectful that someone would feel like they have to walk away, like they have to back out of social media because so many people are so toxic that it's bad for somebody's mental health. The right side is everybody act right.
Yeah, I mean, generally good advice. Don't be a but where I think Boyega's his remarks, the whole referring to Kelly Marie Tran as weak, and the sexual jokes about Rey, like, I don't know, the intent, I think, that was behind them was not necessarily something I disagree with. The tone and the circumstances around those situations probably made what he said a little bit insensitive, but calling Kelly Marie Tran weak, I think that was more of like, hey, we're famous, we need to grow a thick skin. The internet is a horrible, horrible place, and it came across as obviously calling her weak, which was a thing to say. So can we say we've said that a lot?
I have to disagree. While I don't think that the actors of our franchise must bear the torch of our franchise, I do think that they still are human beings, and I think that we should allow them to be human beings. To say that someone is weak because they don't want to be ridiculed, because they don't want to have a character that they're particularly fond of because they played them, or that they might have related to, get bashed, or a character that becomes uber sexualized by some internet humans, I'll just leave it there. We can still allow them to be human beings, and it's okay for human beings to step away from a medium that is causing them pain. Like, why do they have to stay enmeshed in social media just because they're famous? They don't. Walk away, and that doesn't make them weak, and in fact, in my opinion, it makes them stronger. They don't need that bit of publicity or that bit of support just to go live their lives and do themselves.
Yeah, for sure, but I do think there is a certain element of expectation that comes with fame, that you're going to get some of that. You're going to see some of the worst bits of humanity, and you're going to see it in larger quantities and volumes than the average person floating around the interwebs will. Like I said, I don't think it's bad advice to encourage somebody to grow a thicker skin. I think the way he did it was insensitive. But I'm also very insensitive, so.
Well, I just don't think it's weak to walk away from something that's crap. If you don't want to deal with it, don't. We don't have to plug in. Unplug, go lay down, read a book.
Do you think that the brand of Star Wars is hurt by negative commentary from stars of the film?
No, I don't think anybody cares.
Yeah, I think Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say there's just a huge gap between that. There's Star Wars, the universe, and there's Star Wars, the franchise, and I do think that there's kind of a space between those two things.
I think the thing that hurt Star Wars the most were the last couple of movies.
Oh, God.
Actually, come to think of it, has there been a Star Wars actor, period, that hasn't said something offhand at some point?
I mean,
who played Mon Mothma? I've never heard anything from her.
I mean, Mark
three different
Hamill.
actors. So.
Mark Hamill has been like remarkably, I don't know, critical, and made a lot of subtle digs about the last few movies. And
made a lot of not so subtle things either.
yeah, true. And you know, I don't think it hurt.
But I also don't see him as being necessarily, what's the word, disrespectful of the material. Like, while he says what he says and he makes it really clear how he feels, he does not necessarily mince his words. There's also a part of you that knows Mark Hamill loved being Luke Skywalker, and he loves the universe that Luke Skywalker lives in. And that's part of why his criticism is impactful, because he's kind of criticizing from the angle of a fan, and we can understand what he's saying.
Yeah, no, that's clear. And it was, I think, clear too, a lot of where his criticisms were coming from was what he considered the mistreatment of his character, or at least not handled the way he would have liked to have seen the character handled. Yeah, John Boyega doesn't seem to have that. He almost seems like a kid who has showed up to the party and then starts criticizing it, where all the planners and organizers are sitting there looking at him.
Alright, well, the film, specifically The Rise of Skywalker, has had a lot of negative and positive feedback. Generally trending a little more positive, I think, than The Last Jedi. But J.J. Abrams has gone out of his way to say that people who criticize and people who enjoy the film are both right. So maybe remember that regardless of your feelings in the new films, we're all watching them because we love Star Wars and we prefer the galaxy far, far away sometimes to our own. And that's something that should bring us together rather than tear us apart.
Amen, sister.
This week at Tea Time, we have a question from Satimius of our Divine Conclave Guild. After last week's discussion on the updates of Elder Scrolls Online, we learned that the rumors were true and were returning to Skyrim. Satimius simply wants to know, what are your thoughts on the updates, and do you like the areas of Skyrim that have been announced?
So not only are we going back to Skyrim, but we're also going back to Skyrim vampires. We haven't done that before. Yay!
You don't sound excited.
Man, so okay, ESO's newest DLCs, expansions, whatever. They've been pretty good. I'll give them that. But I really don't want to go back and revisit something that, you know, content we've already seen, not content, but areas we've already seen and stuff we've already done. Especially for the lore breakiness that they're implying, that they already kind of did with dragons. Ugh.
It's not lore breaky if they do it. That's what I keep trying to tell people. If they do it, it becomes lore. They get to tell us what lore is. We don't get to tell them. They're the developers. We just ride along.
I know.
Then
on the backs of those dragons.
Then we have to say, oh, I guess our understanding of lore up to this point has just been too limited or incorrect. This is now lore. Welcome to the new era. I'll tell you what, I'm excited about going back to Skyrim. They did say we're going to do some new Skyrim places that we haven't been before, a little further to the west, perhaps. Is that what they said? And all of that said, my most excited thing is the, oh my gosh, what's it called? that seek function, that hunter function now that they're gonna have, where you look for artifacts and stuff. What's it called? Antiquities. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
I'm very excited for the antiques. I think that's a really cool little fun mini game with a lot of varied rewards and awards for participating in that. I love furnishings. I love costumes. I love emotes. That's a lot of RP love for something that's kind of just fun to do on your own in the game. So I am looking forward to that.
Yeah, like I said, the stuff that they have put out has been quality stuff. Even with my lore criticisms about their elsewhere content, particularly with the release of dragons and how they weren't supposed to be around in this time period, blah blah blah.
But they are, now we know.
Yeah, now we know. The content itself is good, and so I'm looking forward to that stuff as well. They're doing a lot to vampire powers and abilities, which is going to be a boon for our sister guild Invictus Imperium in ESO. I think they're gonna. There's a potential for them to experience a surge of attention, much like our Mandalorian guild has had or has enjoyed, with that little baby Yoda.
Well, and hopefully some vampire hunters too, maybe.
Yeah, well, that would be us.
Because we do that. I mean, we've been known to.
Indeed. So the content, I think, is going to be quality, and the stuff that they add, the different systems and even different skill lines. I'm looking forward to those too. I wish it was a different place.
I do think it's cool how they're going to make vampire skills alert guards, kind of like necro skills do. That's a pretty cool piece of immersion that we haven't previously had with the vampire skills.
Totally. I want them to do the same with werewolves. Like
Yeah.
if you accidentally hit that ultimate and transform into a werewolf in town, I want you to be attacked.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh no, I kicked a chick.
Chicken kicker.
If you'd like to submit a tea time question for the podcast, and remember, your chances are coming down to the wire, head on over to sokangaming.com/sokanmedia and find the submission bar on the right-hand side of the page. Thank you everyone for listening today. For more Sokan Media, you can visit us at sokangaming.com/sokanmedia, follow our Twitter at sokangaming, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Sokan Gaming Community. And look for future episodes of the podcast on Google Podcasts and iTunes. Until next time, I've been T.
I'm always Jace.
I have been and am and will remain Leo.
And we'll see you next week.
Stay classy, Sokan.
Thank you for listening to the Sokan Community Podcast. Craving more? Visit us on Twitter and YouTube at Sokan Gaming, as well as our website, www.sokangaming.com. Until next time, stay classy. Right, Jace?